Welcome to the Varsity Voices, your home for Chicago Catholic League football. I'm Joe Frevaletti, and this is our Week 6 recap, plus the announcement of our Zuko's Dog of the Week winner for Week 6. Not with me is my co-host, Dan Frevaletti, but he's got a really good excuse. He is still out enjoying the afterglow of the merger of his daughter, Sydney, with her now husband, Teddy. And I think if you had listened earlier to some of our episodes, we had talked about this was a merger within the Chicago Catholic League because Sydney was a graduate of Bennett Academy. Teddy, a graduate of St. Ignatius. They've been able to put their differences aside and get together in what was a wonderful wedding. So Dan's taking some well-deserved time off this week just for this episode. He'll be back for our Prognosticus episode coming up towards the end of this week. But congratulations to Sydney and Teddy on their wedding, and to Dan and his wife Andrea as well, because it was a beautiful event and I enjoyed every minute of it. For people who saw me there, you probably could tell that. Anyways, I'm here now and I'm going to take the reins for this episode and give Dan a bit of a break so he can recover. I'll run through the Week 6 games and some really good ones as usual within the Chicago Catholic League, and some instant classics too, from what I've heard and from what I've seen. And one of those is the Mount Carmel versus Brother Rice game.
If you are looking to buy or sell a home, contact RE/MAX Realtor and Circle of Legends recipient Christopher Cobb. Let Chris's extensive negotiating experience work to guide you on all of your real estate buying and selling needs. Contact Christopher now to discuss the right strategy for your personalized real estate buying and selling plan. His number is 630-420-0070, or you can visit his website at christophercobb.com.
Now, this is two 5-0 teams coming into this. We talked about how important of a game this was going to be. This was at Mount Carmel, and reportedly, this was the largest crowd ever at Barter Dowling Stadium. And that does not surprise me, considering the two teams, how talented they are, the types of seasons they are putting together right now, in 2025. Both teams, as I mentioned, came in 5-0, and Brother Rice was looking to extend their win streak over Carmel, having beat them last year. Unfortunately for Brother Rice, that did not happen. The full talent and weight of the Mount Carmel talent came into this game. I'm not saying it was a blowout. It was a battle for sure. Emmett Dowling, the Mount Carmel quarterback, he threw for over 350 yards, 3 touchdowns, couple to Marshawn Thornton, his sophomore wide receiver. You know what? We always talk about Mount Carmel's offense, but their defense really came up big in this game. And we'll mention a player or two for them later on in the episode when we talk about Zuko's Dog of the Week. Brother Rice was able to move the ball several times. They got inside the 5-yard line, but just were unable to score or capitalize. Not that they made any mistakes. It was just the Mount Carmel defense that was outstanding in this game, and it was all the usual suspects on Mount Carmel's side of the ball. Mount Carmel comes out on top 34-14 in this game, and they move to 6-0. And Brother Rice gets their first loss of the season, so they're 5-1 now. But Brother Rice put up a good showing against Mount Carmel in this game for sure, and they were in it for 3 quarters from what I saw, but they just could not get over the hump. The Mount Carmel defense stepped up big. So again, 34-14, Mount Carmel over Brother Rice. So the next game I'm going to cover here for you is the IC versus St. Francis game. Another huge matchup. Two teams, big rivalry out in the western suburbs, and this was a shootout, folks. Both teams really putting the pedal to the metal, so to speak, and scoring a lot of points. So I'll tell you right up front, IC won this game 35-28, which is a huge win for IC. And they were not short of people or players that had stepped up in this game for them on both sides of the ball. Nate Lang had another really good and efficient game for C, moving the ball around, pretty balanced. He threw for over 200 yards, 60 yards, a couple of touchdowns as well, passing the ball. The one thing that really kind of stood out in this game to me was IC defense, and they were swarming. There was not a lack of people who were contributing. And one of the things that I thought was most impressive was how they were able to shut down Brock Phillips, the quarterback for St. Francis, to some extent, as well as their really talented wide receivers. And, IC just had a good game plan here, and they executed it very well. There were a couple plays that people were talking about were questionable as far as some of the calls that were made in this game, but I have to give a lot of props to IC because they knew what kind of game this was going to be. It's a huge rivalry, as I mentioned, and they were able to come out on top. Right. So not that St. Francis in any way was held down, because they weren't, but there were a couple key turnovers, interceptions on IC's part. There was some outstanding defensive line performances on IC's part as far as pressuring Brock Phillip, sacking him, creating those opportunities for interceptions on some of the, for some of the IC defensive backs. When it came down to it, IC seemed to have the upper hand here, even though this is a close game. But, IC executed very well on both sides of the ball, and they come away with a win. I think they're both, and let's see, both teams are 4-2 now. And IC especially has got the opportunity to, over the next 3 games, and I can't believe there's only 3 games left in the regular season, but they've got the opportunity to get to that 5-win mark and get that postseason or playoff berth, which eluded them last year. So great win for them. Good job, IC. I'm sure St. Francis has to regroup a bit this coming week, but they can't take any time off because they need that next win as well. So IC wins that game against St. Francis. The other game here, Nazareth versus St. Rita. And this really turned into a showcase, so to speak, of Nazareth's offensive firepower. I think by halftime, Nazareth was up by 35 to 10 was the score at half. A couple of big touchdown throws to Jake Sestone, who again had a really good day. I'm not sure there's anybody who can essentially stop Jake, but St. Rita just could not seem to put any kind of consistent offense together in this game to kind of try and keep Nazareth's offense off the field, which they were unable to do. And then Nazareth was able to score kind of at will here. So, a big win for Nazareth, obviously. A tough loss for St. Rita, obviously. And St. Rita has put themselves in a tough spot with only a couple wins at this point. So I don't think me or Dan, if he were here, would have thought that St. Rita was going to be in this position at this point. But they are, unfortunately, and I don't know where they go from here. But again, great game for the quarterback for Nazareth, Faya, and great game for Jake Sestone as well. So that is that game. Let's see. The next game here was Joliet Catholic versus Notre Dame. And Dan and I had talked about how this was kind of a signature game for both of these teams, because Joliet Catholic has put itself in a difficult spot this year, and they need to win out, right, in order to even get to the playoffs. And this was a defensive struggle for sure. The final score, Joliet Catholic beat Notre Dame 16-7. And the one thing I like about what Joliet Catholic did in this game is that they relied on all aspects of their game, offense, defense, as well as special teams. And they had a couple of big plays which put them in the lead over Notre Dame. And then their defense kind of took over from that point. I don't think there were any points scored in the second half of this game. Actually, the only score, actually, I have that backwards. Sorry. The only scoring before the break was a field goal by Vinny DeNovo, the Joliet Catholic kicker, and they were up 3-0 over Notre Dame at halftime. And they did end up scoring a touchdown and then two more field goals in the second half. So, the final score, Joliet Catholic 16, Notre Dame 7. Joliet Catholic keeps their playoff hopes alive here. Notre Dame does as well, but let's see, Notre Dame would have to win out here as well as Joliet Catholic, and I think I said that earlier. Joliet Catholic has to win out as well. But the one thing Joliet Catholic really, their defense put out here, they had 7.5 sacks. Frankie Pachanka had 3 of those, and he had 2 forced fumbles. Kingston Dunnigan, another defensive lineman for Joliet Catholic, had a couple of sacks, fumble recovery, 2 tackles for loss. So I think that the story of this game for Joliet Catholic was that their defense stepped up here, kept them in the game. Their offense was able to score enough to get the win. So again, that's 16-7, Joliet Catholic over Notre Dame. So the next game was Providence and Marist. This was all Providence in the first half. They were up 21-0 at halftime. They had I think what they tried to do in this game is they tried to run the ball. They tried to be a little more physical, and Broden Mackert, their running back, junior running back, had an outstanding game. He had over 200 rushing yards, I think on 19 or 20 carries, 2 touchdowns, including an 81-yard touchdown when they were at 4th and inches, Providence, and gave Broden Mackert the ball. He broke through the line of scrimmage and went all the way, 81 yards for a touchdown. Some really good defensive performances for Providence as well. Blake Garrigan, primarily the name that we'll mention here. He had, I think, a couple of interceptions. He also had a 45-yard punt return in this game. So now, after this game, Providence, and after this win, they go to 4-2. Marist is 1-5 and essentially out of the playoffs, which Dan and I have been talking about for the last couple of games, that we did not think we would be saying that at this point in the season regarding Marist, because you've only got 3 games left, and Marist only has 1 win at this point, and that was last week over IC. So unless something miraculous happens regarding the seedings and who gets in and that type of thing, and Marist would have to win out too as well, even to get to 4 wins. So I think it's a tough season for Marist, and maybe kind of a rebuilding season for Marist. I know they lost a lot of really good players from last year's team, but they've, it's going to be tough maybe to keep them motivated to get through the rest of the regular season and then see what happens in the postseason. So, okay, we'll go to the game, DePaul Prep versus St. Viator. And here are 2 teams that also were kind of backs against the wall for sure. And I was wondering, and we were wondering, Dan and I, who was going to kind of step up here. And it turned out to be DePaul Prep. And, they actually had a very convincing win in this game, 36-7 over St. Viator. And some of the things that have plagued St. Viator through the course of the first 5 weeks, showed up again here. They were able to move the ball a bit, but they just were not able to get the ball in the end zone. And, one of the things that I saw here, or I like here from DePaul Prep's standpoint, was that they tried to be physical up front, and they were. And that's kind of what helped get them over the top. They again turned to the running back Tyson Hooks, who had another outstanding game here, and they relied on their defense as well. And unfortunately, St. Viator drops to 1-5, and DePaul Prep still in a very difficult position. I mean, they're 2-4 now with only 3 games left, and they've got to win out in order to get to that 5-win mark. So they've got their work cut out for them. But I think this was a very good outing for them against St. Viator. Maybe build a little confidence, a little momentum as well, and help them establish more what their identity might be, going into the final third of the season here. So we'll see how they do, going forward. But as I mentioned, DePaul Prep has got to win out here in order to make sure they've got those 5 wins to get into the playoffs. This next game, which was the Bennett Academy versus St. Patrick game, surprised me a little bit. Although I think both Dan and I in our prognosticus episode, predictions episode, we both picked St. Patrick, and I know Dan is on their bandwagon this year, and I think I see why now. St. Patrick came in and they really, the first half was very close, but I think over the course of the full game, they really kind of exerted their physical dominance here, and they showed some of their offensive balance as far as passing and running the ball. And I think the ground game really became unfortunately something that Bennett could not counteract. And that ground game was led by the running back Anthony Cotrone. Bennett tried to, Bennett stuck with them in the first half, but eventually Notre Dame was able to pull away in this game, and they win pretty convincingly, 46-24. St. Pat's, I believe, goes to 4-2 now, so they are right on the cusp of getting back into the playoffs. They can get a win over the next 3 games. Bennett is 3-3 in a bit of a tough spot. They've got some tough games left over the next 3 games, and they've got to go 2-1 in order to get back to the playoffs again this year. So again, a good game. Good game for St. Pat's primarily. And Bennett kind of has to regroup here. But they did get Ben Clevenger, their quarterback, back, and that seemed to provide them with a little bit of a spark, but wasn't enough to offset the balanced attack and the physicalness of St. Pat's in this game. So, okay, next game was Leo versus De La Salle. 2 teams, you can say they've both been kind of rebuilding. And we've talked about how Leo maybe is a little further along than De La Salle at this point. And that proved to be true in this game. Leo really kind of made a statement on the road. They went to De La Salle to play this game, and they won 46-13. And Leo, they leaned hard on their run game. They have a sophomore running back, Wilson Cox, who I think piled up over 125 yards. I think they had over 230 yards rushing in this game, Leo. So they seem to have found a formula, especially against De La Salle, that maybe they can build on going forward, because Leo is now 3-3, and with 3 games left, if they can get 2 more wins here, they could see themselves get into the playoffs. Now, whether they can do that, we'll see. But De La Salle dropped to 0-6 with the loss, and obviously they're rebuilding, as we've talked about, and they've got some moments of where you can see some of the young talent on their team, but they're just a bit overmatched at this point, but I feel like they're developing and moving in a more positive direction. So that's good for them. Let's see, the Marmion and Marian Catholic game, and this was another one that I was surprised about. I expected this game to be a lot closer. I know I picked Marmion to win this game. Dan might have picked Marian Catholic. Not sure. I'll have to look at what our tallies were as far as who was winning and losing. But what Marian Catholic decided to do in this game was just give the ball to Kyle Scott, their running back. And he rushed for over 265 yards and 2 touchdowns, which was just amazing. And we know Kyle Scott is a really good player, really talented player. And he really showed that against Marmion, because Marmion has got a good defense, and he was able to just kind of carve them up all night. And Marmion just could not recover from that. Now, Marion also, had a really good passing game as well. And I think it's reflected in the score of 34-20 of them winning this game. But their quarterback, Owen Askren, I think he threw for over 180 yards, 3 touchdowns, but he only had 17 attempts. So he was very effective when they passed the ball. They controlled the game by running the ball, but then Askren would step in and get some key yards even with minimal attempts. And it was just too much for Marmion to be able to counter at this point. And Marmion's got to regroup here. They've got an uphill battle now going forward for the next 3 games. So we'll see how they do. We'll make our predictions as well, and we'll be watching. Marion is essentially, out of the playoffs at this point, even if they win out. I think they've only got they do have 2 wins. If they can win out, obviously they can get to that 5-win threshold. Marmion 3-3, backs against the wall, just like Marion. And both these teams need to really have a good last third of the season in order to even get to the playoffs this year. So we'll be following that as we go forward. The next game we have here is Fenwick versus St. Lawrence. And Fenwick really set the tone early, and they never stopped, never tapped the brakes. Fenwick, they mixed special teams with a balanced offense and a defense that really squeezed the Vikings or St. Lawrence all night. And by the time the fourth quarter rolled around, it was Fenwick had cruised to a 41-7 win over St. Lawrence and a 5-1 start. Quarterback Jamin Williams had a really good game, 12 for 17, just under 200 yards, passing TD, rushing TD, or touchdown runs by Jake Thies and Tommy Thies. Raphael Stewart, their wide receiver, he had a 44-yard touchdown catch, and they also had Cameron Garrett, an 80-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. So, as I mentioned, all of the facets of the game were clicking for Fenwick in this, and they beat a good St. Lawrence team and moved to 5-1, while St. Lawrence goes to 4-2. The next game here is Montini versus Carmel, and this was an instant classic, and this was a battle of 2 heavyweight offenses, both Montini and Carmel, and 2 of the top junior quarterbacks in the nation, really. Montini's Israel Abrams and Carmel's Trey Taylor, and they traded scores all night. The final score of this game was 55-54. Montini comes out on top. Listen to these stats. Izzy Abrams, the quarterback for Montini, was 22 of 33 for 568 yards and 5 touchdowns. And his primary receiver at this point is Damasio Ortegon. He had 7 receptions for 208 yards, including the 90-yard game winner. Trey Taylor, on the other side of the ball for Carmel, their quarterback, he was 25 of 37 for 445 yards. He had 5 passing TDs, 3 rushing touchdowns, 8 total, which is just incredible. There was over 1,000 yards of total offense in this game. And how often does that happen in a high school game? Not very often. Even though the scores are really high, obviously, or the amount of yards given up by each of the defense is really high. You still had some really big defensive plays in order to seal the victory here. You've got Nico Castaldo at the very end of the game when Carmel had just scored. They were going for 2 for the win, and Nico Castaldo stopped the 2-point try right on the 1-yard line. So huge play by Nico, and congrats to him. As well as Santino Tenuta had a good game on defense. Carmel, after missing that 2-point conversion, tried an onside kick, and and they did recover that onside kick, and then they had a play or 2 left, and Santino Tenuta sacked Trey Taylor, just sealing the victory for Montini. So it was an instant classic. It's a game that people will be talking about for a long time. And congrats to Montini for coming out on top in this. And they go to 6-0. And Carmel goes to 4-2. And obviously, Montini has already secured their berth in the playoffs. Carmel still looking for that fifth win. They've got 3 games to do it here and get back into the playoffs after missing them last year. So, again, just an outstanding game. If any of you have the time to go and find this game and either watch the game or just watch the highlights of the game, I'd highly recommend it. If you are a fan of high school football and outstanding talent on multiple teams, from quarterback position to the wide receiver position to the running back position to the defenses as well, just some real standout performances. So if you get a chance, you've got to go watch that game. All right, so the last game here, and this is Loyola versus St. Ignatius, and it was senior day at Loyola, which is always a boost, I think, for a particular team, because the adrenaline is running high. You've got your seniors that you're honoring out there, and everybody wants to make sure you come away with a win for your seniors, and that's what Loyola was able to do. Again, we talked about. The final score was Loyola 28, St. Ignatius 7. So that tells you kind of the what Loyola was able to do in this game, and maybe what St. Ignatius was unable to do. And this was just a matter of Loyola being really a well-balanced team. Again, like I mentioned earlier with one of the other teams, Loyola was really able to do it in all facets of the game. Quarterback on offense, they've got a sophomore quarterback in Matthew Lee. He threw a bomb to Joe Hawhay. Also threw another touchdown to Jordan McKinley. They've got an excellent running back in Maldonado, who scored another touchdown, and I think it was 28-0 at halftime. It was all Loyola. And their defense got in on it as well. They were able to block a field goal try. St. Ignatius was able to get on the board late. Connor Heights was able to score from 3 yards out with just under 10 minutes left in the game. But obviously, Loyola kind of dominated in all aspects of this game, and St. Ignatius really didn't have much to counteract that, unfortunately for them. So this makes Loyola 4-1, and with 3 games left. St. Ignatius, they fall to 2-4 now with 3 games left. So again, as Dan and I talk about, St. Ignatius is really backs against the wall here, BATW. With only 3 games left, they've got to win out in order to get into the playoffs. So we will be tracking that, of course, as we go forward. All right, so now one of the favorite times of the week, of course, is as we out of the performances, and let's see. Oh, there he is. There is Zuko. Hold on. I get the whole thing. Not only is barking, but he's growling as well. All right, it is time for Zuko's Dog of the Week, and it's for the top defensive performance, at least from our perspective, Dan's and mine, in the Chicago Catholic League. This is for a defender with a relentless motor, a mean streak, a game wrecker, a team player, all the traits that Zuko exhibits as well. And there were some really worthy defensive performances this week, some outstanding performances this week, across the league, because there were some big wins, some big stops in the last seconds of the game, big sacks in the last seconds of the game in order for some of these teams to win. So, as with every week, it's always difficult to pick who is going to be our Zuko's Dog of the Week winner. And as we mentioned before, it's not just about the stats. We watch some film of a lot of the games, especially when we hear about some of the defensive performances, and we are looking for that player that exhibits the Zuko's traits. And like I mentioned earlier, relentless, bit of a mean streak, game wrecker, right? Team player, all those things. And as far as the winner, I'd first like to talk about, or at least mention the names of some of the nominees, some of the players that made it into the dog pound this week. And there's several here, so bear with me. Tavares Harrington, who we've mentioned before, from Mount Carmel, defensive back. Um, you know, big sack in the game this week against Brother Rice. Also, interception in the end zone late in the game, to kind of seal the victory for them. And Stephen Winkler, their linebacker from Mount Carmel. He was a stud in the middle and helping keep Brother Rice off the scoreboard. Even when they were driving the ball and getting inside, getting in the red zone. Right, Winkler had a really nice game as well at linebacker. Frankie Pichanka from Joliet Catholic. He was an absolute wrecking ball. 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles as Joliet Catholic piled up 7.5 sacks versus Notre Dame. Also, Kingston Dunnigan for Joliet Catholic, the defensive lineman. He had 1.5 sacks in this game. And, really those 2 guys, as well as some of the other players on their defense, because their defense played well. Anytime you only give up 7 points, that is big, as we all know, and that's what Joliet Catholic was able to do. So, they also are in our dog pound this week. IC with their big win over St. Francis, 35-28. Defense was really stout in this game, and put St. Francis in some tough positions all night. Pressure all night. Foley Calcagno, the linebacker for IC Catholic, comes up big late in the game with a 7-yard sack. He had already had a fumble recovery, bunch of tackles as well. The other player for IC, Anthony Caraccio, defensive back, he had 2 interceptions in this game. They could have had more, but outstanding defensive performance by IC and some of those players. Providence as well. Blake Garrigan sealed the win for Providence, and with an late interception in the game. He also had a 45-yard punt return in the first half, and he was part of a really stout defense that, including Jackson Hutton, Gavin Farley, who held Marist to 31 total yards in the first half of the game. So Providence defense came to play. And I mentioned this player earlier, and he's in our dog pound as well, is Nico Castaldo from Montini. And he had some good stats, but that's not why he's in our dog pound, right? He's a defensive or linebacker, defensive back for Montini. And he really helped preserve the victory, 55-54, with a huge stop on a 2-point conversion try by Carmel. He stopped him right at the 1-yard line before he got into the end zone, completely changed the game. So, but as I mentioned, there can only be one Zuko's Dog of the Week winner, and that is Tamarian Garner from IC this year IC this week against their game against St. Francis. It's not always just about the stats, although Tamarian had some excellent stats, but it's about that relentless attitude that some of the defensive players have. And Tamarian had that. He was an absolute game wrecker, and in Brock Phillips' face just about all game, pressuring St. Francis's quarterback, and he had a couple of sacks, a lot of tackles. He's another guy who just runs the whole field and just has relentless effort throughout the whole game. He also had a touchdown, I think, on offense. But Tamarian Garner, defensive lineman, defensive end for C, just an outstanding performance for him, and one that's very worthy of Zuko's Dog of the Week winner. So, Tamarian Garner, congratulations! You are Week 6 Zuko's Dog of the Week winner in the Chicago Catholic League. All right. Congratulations, Tamarian, again. And that's a wrap on Week 6 here on the Varsity Voices. Big thanks to the players, coaches, and families who make Friday nights special around the Chicago Catholic League. And want to thank you, as always, for joining us. If you enjoy the show, follow, subscribe, rate, share, like. It helps more people find high school football and showcase the Chicago Catholic League. Up next this week will be our Week 7 prognosticus episode, where we predict the winners of Week 7 games coming up this week, and that'll drop on Friday morning. I'm Joe Frevoletti, and with me for our next episode will be Dan Frevoletti, so make sure you tune in, and make sure you support your teams, your student athletes, and we will see you soon under the Friday Night Lights.